to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter 1. And if you didn't bring a Bible, you don't have a Bible on you, then there should be a Bible underneath the seat in front of you. And pick that up, and if you need some help, we're on page 1014. All right? I think that's what it is in that Bible, 1014. And if you don't own a Bible, that is our gift to you. Please take that. It's interesting when Chris mentioned that we came in and the church was in disarray. I just wonder what you all thought, like what that meant. Like it's. I mean, come on, we joke about it. It's so millennial to say the internet was out, right? It's like, what, did the roof cave in? What's going on? So we've been in this study, 1 Peter, for the last few weeks, and it's written by one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, who is probably the most well-known disciple of Jesus, and he writes this letter to a group of people that are kind of scattered around. And so this letter would have been taken and then passed on to another group of people, and then taken and passed on to another. And these people, something that they all had in common is they were all convinced of the gospel. They were following Jesus, but they're living in a place that is not following Jesus, and so there's suffering that they're experiencing, and some of it's because they're at odds with people because of their they believe this to be true. They believe the gospel, and they believe in Jesus, that He came and He died, He rose again, and but also it's just the living of life, just living in a world that is just broken, and we experience hard stuff. This past week we were just reminded of this, just some hard stuff, and so with all of that combined, they're struggling. They're kind of just walking through the fire, and Peter knows it, and so he writes them a letter to say, hey, here's how you, as a follower of Jesus, walk through the fire and not get consumed by the fire. And so that's what we've been walking through, what we've seen the last few weeks. And it's interesting that he doesn't start with, hey, you want to know how to walk through the fire and not get burnt by it, or not get consumed by it. He doesn't start with, hey, do this, and this. You need to go about your life and go about and make sure you're doing this and get this and do this. He doesn't do that. But he begins with, and this is what we've hit on so far in 1 Peter 1, he begins with, hey, remember who you are. You want to know how you're going to get through the fire, or how to be in the fire and not get consumed by the fire? You got to remember who you are. You got to remember who God is. You got to remember the gospel. You got to remember that He is a God of great mercy, that He has sent Jesus to die, to come for you, that He lived and died, and He rose from the dead in your place for your sin. You got to remember this. You got to remember who you are. Remember who God is. Remember the gospel. And then he tells them that even the suffering that you're in, there is a purpose to these sufferings. In fact, he calls them trials. These are trials. It's God putting you on trial to reveal something, to reveal that is there a genuineness to your faith. This faith that you say that you hold to, that is this real? And so God is sending you trial. These things that you're walking through, they're not random. He's sending you these things so that you might know whether the faith that you claim is real. And so you don't need to run. You don't need to run from it. This past week, my son Charlie was on a hunting trip with his grandfather and uncle, and they were in Wyoming. And when he got there, he was sending me like pictures and some video of kind of the landscape. And one of the videos that he sent, he was just kind of doing one of these, and he told me at the time that they were out looking for pronghorn, and so he shot me this video, and I'm looking at this video, and I'm like, I thought I had seen some wildlife in this video, so I'm like, hey, did I are those pronghorns in the video? Is that what this is? And he's like, no, Dad, those are cows. And come to find out, there's a greater population of cows in Wyoming than human beings, right? So that's true fact. You can write that down if you're taking notes today. But something I learned this week about cows is that, maybe you already knew this. I didn't know that cows, when they are terrified of storms. And so when a storm is rolling in, and typically, storms come from the west and move east, and so as storms, as they can sense a storm coming in, they start moving away from the storm. They'll just walk or start running away from the storm. And of course, the storm always catches up to them because they can't outrun the storm. But even when the storm is coming and they're in the storm, they're running, like running away from the storm, which means they're just prolonging the storm. They're just in the storm. But I did learn that on the flip side, that buffalo actually go the other way. So they see a storm, they sense a storm that is coming in, that it's just kind of their instinct that they will herd together and they will charge into the storm. Which is just really, really interesting. And so what happens then is as they're charging in the storm, it lessens the length of the storm for them, the frustration that they have to go through, and the pain that the storm brings, and all of that. That it lessens that for the buffalo, but the cow is just kind of going. They're trying to run away from it, but you're just right in it the whole time. And it just reminded me of what Peter's saying. He said, when storms start rolling in, you don't need to run from the storms because God is doing something in it. These are trials. You don't want to miss this. There's something that God is doing in the trial, in the suffering, in the hardship, in the difficulties in your family, in your job, in your health. Like this means something. So don't just tuck and run because you're going to miss what it is that God is doing. And particularly, what Peter is saying, God is revealing how legitimate this faith is that you say that you have. And Peter is saying, listen, you stay in it. And this is what the whole opening of this letter has been. Remember who you are. Remember who God is. Remember what God is doing in difficult days. Remember the gospel, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus in your place for your sin. Don't forget this. I know you're suffering. I know it's hard. This is the first thing you got to know. Remember who you are. Remember God. Remember the gospel. And then Peter says this. He makes a switch, a transition here by saying in verse 13, therefore. You've heard me say this before, but whenever you see the word therefore, you should always go back and see what it's there for, right? That's not original with me, but yeah, you got to go back. So you can't just see, okay, therefore. You got to go, okay, what then? What's going on here? Why? What happened before this? And so Peter begins this next section with therefore. In other words, because of everything that is true about God, because of everything that is true about you, because of everything that is true about the gospel and suffering and all of these things, he's going to say, this is how you live. And this is going to be the rest of this letter. This is how you live. This is what you do and how you live your life. As someone who is following Jesus in a place where people are not following Jesus, where you are suffering, following Jesus in this place. This is how you live. Now, in this next section here that we're covering this morning is really an intro to the rest of this part of the letter, where he says this is how you live. And in the middle of this next section, we find kind of the key, kind of what this is all built around. And it starts in verse 15. It says this: "But as he who called you is holy, God has called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." And so Peter, he's right in the midst of this. This is how you live. He's saying, as one who has encountered the grace of God, one who has eyes have been opened to the gospel, to the reality of the gospel. It's like, oh, I didn't see it before. Now I see it. Jesus came. He died for me in my place, for my sin. I see it. For someone who has encountered the grace of God, the gospel, you've been given a new life. You've been given a new hope. You've been given a new future. Like someone who has encountered all of this, he says, now this is how you live. You live a holy life. This is what you do. This is how you live this life. This is how do you live as a follower of Jesus in the midst of people that are not following Jesus when it's hard? You live a holy life. You live a holy life. And Peter pulls a quote right out of the Old Testament, Leviticus, where God says, you shall be holy, for I am holy. You shall be holy, for I am holy. Now, we learned three things in this quote. We're going to spend the better part of this sermon on these three things. One is that God is holy. Two, because God is holy, we must be holy. And three, because God is holy, we can be holy. All right? So the first thing is this, that God is holy. God is holy. Holy is a word that just simply means to be set apart. to be set apart. That's what it means. When we're talking about God's holiness, though, we're talking about God's, what some theologians would call his otherness. His otherness. Like he is so outside of, like he's other than us, other than anything else. He's different from anything that has been created. He is in a class all of it and all of his own. He is infinitely above you and me. Now, let's understand this. We got to get that God is not just on a scale, and he's like, there's a scale, and then God's at the top of the scale, and I may be down here or down here or down here, or whatever it is. That's not what's going on. That if there's a scale, we got to understand God's not at the top of some scale. He is off the scale, right? He is off. There is no scale that holds God. He is outside of the scale. He is off the scale, above the scale. In Psalm 50, God is rebuking some people who have forgotten who he is. And he says, you want to know how you forgot who I am? You know how you got there? Here's what he says. He says, these things you have done, and I have been silent. Check this. You thought that I was one like yourself. Like you thought that you and I were like the same thing. You thought maybe I was just a little bit smarter, a little bit, stronger, but you thought we were the same thing. What makes God God is not simply his power, not simply his love or his wisdom. What makes God God is that he is holy. He is holy. He is far above. His power, his love, his wisdom is infinitely off the scale. Infinitely off the scale. His power is love. He is holy in his power. He is holy in his love. He is holy in his wisdom, off the scale. It seems as though in our, Western American culture that we are trying really hard to get God down to our level. We're trying to get God down to where I can relate to God. And he's my homeboy, right? He's that we sing. I mean, we don't, but there are songs that have been written that are called worship songs that treat Jesus like he's their boyfriend, right? Some like love song to Jesus type thing. And this is what we do. We take these songs. We're trying to take God and bring him down to our level. We're trying to get him. So I want him relatable. I want him. I want him. Huggable and lovable. That's what I want God to be. And let me just tell you. You know what happens when we make God like us? You know what happens when we bring God down to make him like us? Let me tell you. We fall into worry, anxiety, depression, fear. Because if you think God is just a bigger version of you, that he's just a stronger, maybe smarter version than you, that he's kind of up on the scale a little further than you are, if that's the way that you relate to God, that's the way that you see God. When things come into your life that you cannot handle, well, you begin to wonder, well, I don't know if God can handle this. Maybe this is kind of further up on the scale than God is. And so what do? We fall into worry, concern. We have no place to go with it. We have no place to go with this stuff. And so we just own it ourselves. That's because you don't see him for who he really is. He is off the scale. He is so far above and infinitely above the scale. He is holy. Yes, he is our Father. Yes, he is our shepherd, but he is holy. Here's what he said about himself in Isaiah 55. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Listen, you will never experience the peace that comes with trusting God until you recognize that he is holy. That he is holy. He's not simply higher than you on the scale. He is off the scale. And when you see him for who he is, you realize that I can't play games with this God. I can't manipulate this God. I can't back this God in a corner. He is outside of me. He is far above me. But when you see that his power and wisdom and love goes far beyond what you can imagine, you stop complaining and you realize there is nothing above him. If there is nothing in your life, there is nothing in the universe that he can't handle. God is holy. God is holy. The second thing that we see in this statement that God makes about himself is that because God is holy, we must be holy. Because God is holy, we must be holy. So while when holy is used to describe God, it speaks to his otherness. He is infinitely outside of anything created. When holy is used to describe creatures like us, or even anything that is deemed as holy, it takes on a bit of a different meaning. It refers to something or someone that God has pulled out, that has set apart for himself. He is separated from everything else to be used only for his purposes. This is what it means to be holy. This is for any one of us. When we're talking about anything outside of God that is considered to be holy, that means that God has pulled it out from the rest and has dedicated it for his own purpose. This is used for me. This is devoted to me, for me to use fully however I want to use. So when God says that you shall be holy, he is saying that you have been cut out from the rest to be his, that there is no part of your heart, there is no part of your life that is kept from him. He takes you full, he takes you and he uses all of you is for his use. You belong to him. You are wholly devoted to God. It's like if you were to go buy, let's just say you were to go purchase a lamp. All right? So you go purchase a lamp from a store, and you go to the store, and there's a shelf full of lamps, and there's this one particular lamp that's got, they got a bunch of the same color, a bunch of the same kind, and you just pull one right off the shelf, right? Because this is what you want. You pull one of those lamps. There's a lot of them the same color, a lot of them the same kind, and there's nothing special about this one or this. They're all just the same, but you just pull one right off, and you take it to the front, and you purchase this lamp. Now, what happens? This lamp, all of a sudden, is yours, and it's to be used for your purpose. This is what God does. He takes a people. He takes somebody like you, and he takes them from the rest to belong to him, to be his, to be exclusively used for him and him alone. Because God is holy, we must be holy. We have been set apart by God to be used totally wholly for him. We are wholly devoted to him. So then 3, because God is holy, we can be holy. Because God is holy, we can be holy. Because God is the one he is the one who has called us out. Because we belong to him, to live a holy life, to live a life as one who belongs to God is possible. Why? Because you belong to God. He's the one who's done this. He's the one who initiated. He's the one who pulled you out. He's the one who pulled you out for his purposes. So it is possible that you can do this. It is possible that you can be holy. We were wired by God, and Peter's going to show us that we have been wired by God to live this life devoted to him. We have been wired by God to live a life devoted to him, beginning with the mind. Look what he says in verse 13. He says, therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Preparing your mind for action. Preparing your minds for action. You may have a King James version that says, gird up your loins. The loins of your mind is what it says. The girding up the loins of your mind. That would have made a lot of sense to one culture, this culture, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot to us today. But here's what he's saying. To gird up the loins of your mind, or to gird up your loins would mean this. So back in the day, they all would wear robes, these long flowing robes. It didn't matter if you were a man, a woman, whatever. You wore these long flowing robes. And if you were like going out to battle, or you're going for a run or whatever, you couldn't do it with all this material hanging down. It would just get in the way. You're just kind of kicking up, and you're kind of constricted, and so you would gird up your loins. You would, if you're going into battle, they would say gird up your loins. So you take the robe, the material, and you'd pull it up, and then you would tuck it into your belt. So then you are free. You are not constricted anymore. You're ready for battle. You're ready for whatever it is that you need to do. That's the picture here that Peter gives for how followers of Jesus engage their mind in order to live a holy life, a life that is wholly devoted to Jesus. What's it going to take? It's going to take a mind that is ready for action. You got to be alert. You got to think correctly. A mind that thinks deeply about the things of God. A mind that thinks deeply about what life is about. But Peter says that your mind, the way you do that is you set your hope. You prepare your mind for action so that you can set your hope. That you might set your hope on the things that matter, on the things that God has done, on the things that God is actually. He says the thing that God is going to do. He says upon the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Your mind is set on something that hasn't even come to you yet, but is secured for you because you know what has happened. And so this is what he talked about earlier in chapter 1. He says, look, because Jesus has come, because the grace that has been given, because Jesus came, he lived, he died, and he rose again on your behalf, because he has caused you to be born again, you have this living hope that is coming. You have this inheritance, that life, this isn't the way life is always going to be. There is a life coming that is going to be undefiled, that is never going to fade. It is going to go on forever. He says, look, you know what? You need to keep your mind ready for action. How do you do that? You think about what is coming. You think about what is coming. You have a living hope confirmed by the resurrection of Jesus. This life isn't all there is, that there is an inheritance coming because life goes on forever. Peter says to prepare your mind for action by putting your hope in what is coming for you. So our minds are prepared for action. And he says, and being sober-minded, meaning that you're not just lackluster in your thinking. You're not just letting anything come into your thoughts. You're not just allowing your mind to go anywhere. You're not allowing your mind to go unchecked. You're not careless about what you give your thinking to. You don't let the culture or your friends or your buddies at work, your teachers, your college professors to determine what life is about and how life is to be lived. And you're not careless with the Bible. You're in it. You're studying it. You're meditating on it so you can think correctly, so you know how to live correctly. Because it's the Bible that tells us this is how you live. This is how you are wired to live. And so I'm in it. I'm studying it. I'm meditating on it because I want to live correctly. And you're not careless with sin. You're not giving your mind just unchecked. And you're not careless with sin, that you take temptation seriously. You understand that there is a real enemy that wants to take you out, that wants to change the way that you think about sin. He wants you to think that sin is normal. Just take it out of the category of sin. Whatever that is, just take it right out. It's normal. He wants to change the way that you think about sin because he wants you to tolerate so he can take you out. Some of you are getting obliterated with sin, giving in to temptation, and it's because you have become passive in your mind. You've ignored the Bible. You're living as though there is no more to life than just what you see here in these few short years. Listen, if you belong to God, that means you have a faith that is legit, that a faith that is genuine, meaning that you have been set apart from the rest to live totally for God and God alone. And that begins with preparing your mind for action. How do I live this life totally devoted to God? It begins by preparing your mind for action. You've got to think correctly. You got to know that you're in it. You don't just wake up and just see what comes. You're in it. You know how to see. You know how to view the world. You know what your place is in this world. You know who God is. You know the gospel. And when your mind is engaged with your hope set on the gospel, your hope set on the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus and your place for your sin, then your will begins to change. What you want begins to change. Your desires begin to change. They begin to be conformed to where you want to live this holy life. You want to live the way of Jesus, where your life reflects the holiness of God. This is what he says beginning in verse 14. He says, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. He says, he begins by saying, look, don't go back to the way you were before God saved you. Like, don't go back. Don't be conformed to the passions of your former life. Listen, before God called any of us, before God saved any of us, we all had ideas of what it took to make us happy. We all had our own ideas that this is what, if I'm going to be happy, I'm pretty sure that it's going to look like this. It's going to look like me getting some of this, getting more of this. And listen, and that's different for all of us. Like your thing may be one thing, my thing might be another. Your thing might be, I want a reputation. I want a reputation as a successful person. And my thing might be, I just want to make a little bit more money. If I just had this next bracket, it's different for all of us. For some, it's if I just had, pleasure, nonstop pleasure. Whatever it is, we all have our own thing, but we all have it. And before God opened our eyes to see how foolish that was, we all were going after it. It's all we could think about. Because if my happiness is wrapped around that thing, of course I'm thinking about how I can get that thing. And this is where all of us were. This is all of us were at some point. For some, it's sexual pleasure. The hip-hop artist Drake, he once said in an interview a few years ago, he said this. He said, I used to be filling a void. There was a point where I felt like I needed to keep the company of a different woman every night. And he said, those moments after sex are the realest moments a man will ever have in his life. And if you happen to be with somebody that isn't someone you want to converse with, you start feeling like, man, I wish I was just here watching True Blood by myself. A different woman every night. I thought that's what it was. I thought that's where it was. And he says, and I was just trying to fill a void. Maybe for some, it's that's not your thing. Maybe it's just being liked by others. I just want to build my platform. I want to be liked by a lot of people, be known and liked by a lot of people. 2019, Katy Perry, she surpassed 100 million songs downloaded. 100 million songs downloaded. That's crazy. You know how she responded? She put this on Instagram when she found that out. She said, 100 million digital singles and still insecure. Some people look for happiness in success. If I can just be successful, I just want to be successful. I've used this before because I'll just never forget this. Watching this interview live on 60 Minutes with Tom Brady. It was right after he won his 3rd Super Bowl ring. And he said this. He says, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think that there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal. I reached my dream. This is my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be all it's cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. And he says, and what else is there for me? And Croft, the guy that was interviewing him, said, well, what's the answer? And Brady says, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. All of us have been searching for something to make us happy. All of us. This is not a celebrity thing. This is a human being thing. All of us look for something. What is the thing that's going to get it for me? Is it going to be that relationship? Is it going to be that degree? Is it going to be that status? Is it going to be that level of income? What is it? What is it? We all have it. And God opens our eyes. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, there has been a time in your life, He has opened your eyes to see the reality of your life, that is foolish. That there's nobody that can get you that happiness that you're looking for. There's nobody in this world, there's nothing in this world that can do that. Because we were created to know God. We were created to live for Him. And as Peter said, God caused us to be born again. He opens our eyes to the reality of Jesus, that He really did come to us, that He really did die and rise again for our sin, in our place. So what Peter is saying here is he's going, look, that was your former life. Now that you have been saved, now that God has caused you to be born again, now that you have a living hope, man, don't be looking at that stuff. Don't think that don't go back to that place. I know that, listen, what Peter is saying is, look, I know in all of us, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, there is something in us, there's something in all of us that is drawn to the old way of life. There's something in us that says, I don't know, man, maybe if I did have that. Maybe if I did have that persona, maybe if I did have that experience, maybe if that's what it's going to take to bring me, that is in all of us. And Peter's going, look, you know that none of that works. You know it. Don't go back there. Live as obedient children, he says. Live as obedient children. And some of you are going, okay, so now we're getting around to what I remember, or what I just associate with holy living. Holy living and obedience. That's what it is. It's just, I got to live a life that is moral, that is cleaned up. That's holy living. That's what this is all about, Stephen, right? I mean, I don't need a sermon for this. I understand. I got to be holy. I know that. That's why I feel guilty, because I'm not always living the moral, cleaned up life like I know I should be living. This is what this is all about, right? It's obedience and rules. But listen, a couple of things here. One, don't forget that God is the sovereign creator of the universe. He knows how life is meant to be lived because he created it. And so whenever God says to do life in a certain way, unless God is just evil, then the life that he calls us to is the life that was meant to be lived. And then, number two, when God calls us to obedience, it's not like he's calling us. It's not like subjects to a slave master, like you live this life. Be obedient. Be obedient. You live a holy life. You signed up for this. You live this holy life. It's not what this is. It's not like subjects to a slave master, but notice the language. It's as children to a father. Children to a father. That's because holy living moves from your mind to your will to your emotions. This is what he is getting at in verse 17. He says, and if you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. Fear here, it's not a fear where it's like an afraid kind of fear. It's a fear that speaks of a sense of wonder and awe. That this is what he's talking about. A fear of it's not the kind of fear that brings about obedience because of dread. It's an obedience that comes because of trust. Because of trust. Trust that you are loved by a father. Trust that not only does my father know what will bring me the most joy, but my father knows that for me to go any other way would only destroy me. There's a story in the Old Testament that illustrates this in a beautiful way. So when David became king of Israel, as you can imagine, he inherited some enemies. And one, maybe it was the most prolific kind of enemy in all of his life. I mean, starting from where he was even a teenager, where he got in on a battle with Goliath. It was a battle with the Philistines, and it seems like the Philistines kind of followed him for all of his life. And so when he became king, the Philistines were concerned that David would lead Israel to be such a powerhouse of a country, of a nation, that they would overtake everybody around them. And so they decided to go kind of early and kind of ward it off and attack early. And so David became king, and the Philistines attacked. And at one point, the Philistines had attacked in such a way where David had to go on his way. Like he had to leave. He had to go into hiding. And so there was a moment in 2 Samuel chapter 23 where we see this moment, and it's just like a paragraph, but we see this moment where David is in the wilderness and he is hiding from the Philistines. The Philistines had occupied a lot of land around them, including the town of Bethlehem, where David was born and raised. And so here he is. He's in the wilderness. He's in hiding from the Philistines. They're kind of encamped all around him. And he's there. The scripture tells us that he's there with a couple of his, or three of his mighty men. The mighty men, there were several that were part of this kind of category of David. they were the valiant soldiers. They had proven themselves to be kind of above the rest in the army. And so there were these three of the valiant men that were with Jesus, or with David. They were the mighty men of David. And at one point, David, no doubt, during all of this, is just kind of, he's just down, right? We just kind of went through Psalms. We know how down David can get. And so he's no doubt, he's down, he's depressed, he's maybe perhaps even doubting his own leadership abilities, he's doubting, he's just in a place. And at one point, here's what happens. They're in this, I don't know, they're in hiding. David just kind of sighs to himself, and he says out loud, he says, oh man, if I could just get some water, to just get some water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. And now we don't know exactly what he was getting at there. It could be that he's going, man, I remember that water, and that sounds so good. That sounds so good. He might have been hungry, thirsty, but that sounds so good. I remember how that was such good water. Or it could have been, you know what? If I could get water in Bethlehem, I could get water anywhere, and I wouldn't be hiding out. I wish the whole thing was just over. But regardless, we don't know exactly what he was getting at, but he just kind of muttered out loud, just going, man, to get some of that water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. Well, the mighty men, they heard David. They heard what he said, and they didn't say anything about it. They didn't approach David about it. They just heard him. And they looked at each other and made the decision, we're going to go get him some of that water, which would mean that they would have to go and cross enemy lines to get the water. They would have to cross into enemy territory to make their way through the Philistine armies to get a cup of water for David. And that's exactly what they did. They fought their way through the enemy's lines. They made it to Bethlehem. They got the water from the well. Now, I don't know how this whole thing went down. There might have been a guy's like pulling up a bucket while the other guys are like fighting off Philistines or like they're trying to get the water. And then they fight their way back through and they cross enemy lines and they get through and they get down to David. And there he is, and they present him with this water. As you can imagine, you would expect that when they hand David the water, David is in shock. Because he knew what they just did. He knew what it took, how they risked their life to get him this water. No doubt, when they went out, they knew that there was a good chance they don't come back. And do you know what David did after they gave him this water? You know what David did with the water? Poured it out. And here's what he says. He said, far be it from me, Lord, to do this. Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives, and David would not drink it? No doubt the men were honored, as crazy as that sounds, were honored by what David just did, pouring out the water. Because in that moment, the king, their king, was saying, your devotion is so great that even though I'm your king, I'm not worthy of this kind of devotion. That you would go and risk your life for me to just to have a cup of water. I'm not worthy of this kind of devotion. Here's what I want you to see. When you're devoted to someone, when you delight in someone, where their joy is your joy. When you're totally devoted to someone, then there is no difference between a sigh and a command. It doesn't matter what the cost is. When you're totally devoted to someone, your greatest pleasure is their pleasure. And so their sighs become your glad command. You see, that's very different than going, well, I know what the Bible says. I know the Bible says I'm supposed to give, but how much do I have to give? I know the Bible says that sexual immorality is a sin, but how far is too far? I know I'm supposed to share the gospel with my friends and my neighbors and the people that I'm working with, but can I just like not cuss in front of them? Listen, that is not coming from a holy heart. A holy heart, a devoted heart says, how much can I give? What are the desires of his heart? Because that's what I want to do. God, you love the lost, I'll share the gospel. You love the poor, I'll be generous. This is what it means to live a holy life. My life is not my own. I've been bought with a price. I belong to him. I am wholly devoted to him. There is nothing in my life, nothing in my heart that is kept from him. I belong to him. I am at his disposal. I am here to be used however he wants. Whatever he wants to do, I'm his. I belong to him. I'm wholly devoted to him. Last week I told you that when you read the Old Testament that you should see that it all points to Jesus. That it all points to Christ. And here in this story that I just told you from 2 Samuel 23, we don't just see Jesus in David, but we see Jesus in these men. Jesus himself, who is the king, what did he do? He broke through enemy lines to bring to us the water of life. See, remember, how is it that we got here anyway? How is it that I ever got pulled off the shelf? How is it that I became one that has been set aside for his purposes? How did that ever happen? How is it that I ever got to the place that I belong to God, that you have been set apart? How is that possible? How did that happen? It happened because Jesus didn't just risk his life. He gave up his life to give us living water, to give us what our souls have been longing for, what no amount of money or sex or success or relationships or recognition could bring. It was through the sacrifice of Jesus, his life, that God bought us. And so Peter, he says, knowing that you were ransomed. You were ransomed. You were bought back. You were redeemed. You were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. Listen, if David wouldn't drink the water that these men risked their lives to bring him because it was so precious to him, how much more precious is the blood that was shed for us? Because it came to us not at the risk of Jesus' life, at the cost of his life. So when we gather around and we remember the death of Jesus, when we come around the table, the communion table, and we pick up the cup that represents the blood of Christ, the precious blood of Jesus Christ, what we do when we pick that up, we are thinking about what he is. This is what we should be doing. We are thinking about what he has done. We are thinking about the grace that has been poured out for us, that has been brought to us. And it is causing us to think about the grace that will be brought to us in the end, when God will restore all things and we will have an inheritance that is unfading, where Jesus is king. And we will have this life that will never fade and never die. In John chapter 17, it's a fascinating prayer that Jesus prays. He prays it right before he is arrested. You know, there's something about when you hear somebody pray or you read the prayers of somebody, it gives you insight into their life. And if you've never read John 17, never read Jesus' prayer there, I would encourage you to read it. But in this prayer that Jesus prays, he said this. He says, for them, meaning his followers, for them, I sanctify myself. I set apart myself. I'm setting myself apart. I have left heaven. I have come to them. I have set myself apart for them, that they too may be truly sanctified, that they too may be truly set apart, that they too may be holy. And so God says, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And that's possible because Jesus is holy for us.